نبدأ.
تفضل.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بداية نشكر البنك المركزي السعودي على استضافة ندوة الاستقرار المالي للعام الخامس. طبعا هذا العام هو استثنائي بكل معنى الكلمة، واجه العالم فيه تحديات كبيرة وتداعيات ذات أثر سلبي على الاقتصاد العالمي بسبب جائحة كورونا، وحتى جلستنا هذه الافتراضية ما هي إلا من تداعيات هذا الفيروس الذي شل حركة العالم والاقتصاد العالمي. الحكومات تحركت فورا لاستيعاب تداعيات هذه الجائحة وأثرها الكبير على القطاع الخاص حتى يكون هناك امتصاص واحتواء لهذه التداعيات، واتخذت سياسات وإجراءات عديدة. سنناقش في الجلسة الأولى طبعا مدى استجابة السياسات التي اتخذت في الحفاظ على الاستقرار المالي خلال الفترة المقبلة، لكي لا نطيل ونبدأ بالأسئلة التي ستأخذ 45 دقيقة هذه الجلسة، وسيكون هناك حوالي 12 سؤال بحيث يكون بمعدل تقريبا 3 دقائق لكل سؤال. ضيوفنا اليوم الأكارم صاحب المعالي الأستاذ محمد الجدعان وزير المالية ووزير الاقتصاد والتخطيط المكلف، وصاحب المعالي الأستاذ بندر الخريف وزير الصناعة والثروة المعدنية، وسعادة الأستاذ محمد العقيل رئيس مجلس إدارة شركة جرير. العالم واجه تحديات كبيرة معالي الأستاذ محمد الجدعان. ما هي التحديات الكبيرة التي تواجه الاستقرار المالي في ظل الظروف الحالية للاقتصاد العالمي؟
أول شيء حياك الله أخ محمد، وأرحب بأخي وصديقي معالي الأخ بندر، وأيضا أخي وصديقي محمد العقيل، وبالجميع. وأشكر الزملاء في منظومة الاستقرار المالي جميعا، وزارة المالية والبنك المركزي السعودي وهيئة السوق المالية على التناوب في إعداد هذه الندوة السنوية اللي أعتقد لها أهمية كبيرة جدا، وخصوصا في ظروف مثل الظروف الحالية. طبعا لا يخفى على الجميع أنه سنة 20 سنة غير عادية جدا بكل المقاييس، سنة غير عادية في الجوانب الإنسانية والصحية، سنة غير عادية في الجوانب الاقتصادية، سنة غير عادية في الجوانب المالية، سنة غير عادية في حتى التواصل الإنساني. زي ما أنت بديت بالكلام أنه إحنا نتواصل عن بعد، وإن كان له مزايا كثيرة، ولكن يظل التواصل عن قرب والاجتماعات الشخصية لها دور مهم. لكن أعود لسؤالك أخي الكريم، أنا أعتقد العالم لم يواجه أزمة مثل ما واجه العالم في عام 2020 من خلال جائحة فيروس كورونا، سواء على جوانب متعددة لمست الإنسان في بيته، ولمست الإنسان في عمله، لمست الإنسان في الشركات أو الأملاك اللي يملكها ويديرها، واجهت الدول في تعاملها مع هذه الأزمة. ما أعتقد العالم بالتأكيد ليس لا أحد مننا واجه هذه الأزمة في حياته، لكن العالم كله لم يشهد مثل هذه الأزمة، مثل الحرب العالمية الثانية. لكن في نفس الوقت كمان كانت ردة فعل العالم بشكل عام جيدة جدا، وناخذ مثال عليها المملكة، وأعتقد في عدد من الدول أخذت إجراءات مشابهة. المملكة في البداية اختارت الصحة والإنسان على الاقتصاد وعلى كل شيء آخر، وكانت سياسة متبعة في كثير من الدول لاحتواء الفيروس، ومن ثم ننظر إلى الأمور الأخرى، المحافظة على صحة الإنسان، ومن ثم ننظر إلى الأمور الأخرى.
To cover other issues.
What is good in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and in a number of countries, and I would like to specifically talk about Saudi Arabia, is the very good response, the measures taken in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and in the various government sectors dealt with the crisis as one team. Committees were formed. One of them is the crisis management headed by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince that have within 30 days announced numerous measures. At the same time, the lockdown came to support the economy and to support the jobs and the private sector, and in particular the SMEs. At the same time, the central bank in Saudi Arabia announced packages of support cash flow for the banking sector. There was clear harmony with the health organizations and a great deal of financial resources was directed into the health sector. Even the Ministry of Health, together with the private sector and the health industry, there was very effective cooperation. So we emerged from the total lockdown very quickly, and we were one of the fastest and most daring countries to get out of the lockdown and to gradually put back the economy on the growth track. And we have seen positive results. However, let's address the main issue. We are still in the crisis. We are still facing the virus. The worry is still there at the global level, and the organizations, our international financial organizations, regional and local, are guided by the measures, but they warn against any second waves or third waves, and we should be prepared. Thank you, Your Excellency. Let me move now to the Minister of Industry. The crisis has impacted the industrial sector, no doubt. What are the challenges that you see from your perspective in the strategy of the Kingdom in 2030, and what are the reflectives of the financial incentives by the government? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mohammed, and good evening to everyone. And I would like to, in my return, express my appreciation to the colleagues in the Central Bank and the CMA for their efforts. No doubt, as you have said, the crisis has had a great impact globally. The industrial sector relies highly on the supply chains. And what happened at the beginning of the crisis was a break in the supply chains, or in other words, there was problems in these that have repercussions on the industrial sector in the Kingdom and in the world in general. How the government dealt with it and our ministry with this crisis, as mentioned by His Excellency the Finance Minister, I believe that the teamwork which took place at all levels in the government had the main guarantor of success and to identify the priorities for the various sectors in the industrial sector. One of them, of course, and we were facing challenges, top of which is how it is possible to guarantee the safety of the human resources working in the industrial section and apply the precautionary measures, especially with the lockdown, at the same time to secure the continuity of work in the basic and crucial industries, especially the food industries, the pharmaceutical industries, and also the other industries related to safety and security. That was the top priority for us at the ministry, and there was a joint hope that was led by the ministry with the system that it supports, such as the Royal Commission for Jubail and Yambo, the Industrial Fund, and the Export Authority. All these have worked together in this with our sector and our industry in order to ensure the sustainability of work, to guarantee the supply chain for the markets of key products. And thanks be to Allah that the Kingdom has emerged very honorable in the way that it had successfully dealt with the situation. We can ensure that we haven't faced any major issues, even at the peak of the crisis. And by the graciousness of Allah and the successful teamwork and the wise leadership and the teamwork at our ministry, we have created a crisis cell that worked 24/7 to make sure that we were supplying all what is required from outside. At the same time, there were other sectors that were severely impacted that had nothing to do with the daily supplies, and these were impacted because of the sharp decline in demand, and also with with the lockdown and its outcomes. This was the other part of dealing with the crisis, and this is how to deal with the challenges of the private sector that they faced in relation to the cash flow. And the first package that the state dealt with, and how to respond or overcome the problem of cash flow faced by the economic sectors, such as the industrial sector that relies heavily on loans, whether commercial loans or from the government funds, such as the Industrial Development Fund. That was part of the incentives that were made through the higher committee that has stipulated quickly the means and the hows of dealing with the problem and the challenge of cash flow. For example, in the industrial fund, we quickly moved to help the SMEs by delaying all their financial commitments and deferring that to after 2020. As for the big businesses, we dealt with them each individually based on their particular cases and their cash flow situation. Thank you, Your Excellency. From the break of supply chains, I'll move to Mr. Mohammed Al Jarir. You woke up one day to transfer education into online education, to closures, to lockdowns that came after, and precautionary measures, because health and human life is more important, as a top priority. In the your sector, the retail sector, was severely impacted in light of the break in the supply chain that was mentioned by the Ministry of Industry. How did this crisis impact your business in the retail sector? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much. In relation to the our sector, as you have mentioned, all of a sudden everything changed in terms of studying and working at distance. We've been through crises, of course, before, such as the 1990 during the Gulf War and that, but this crisis is different and more severe. We noticed immediately the first challenge that we faced is our responsibility towards the homeland, that now we have to deal virtually. If we stop selling computers, laptops, or these similar devices, then the impact is going to be very big, not commercially for us in retail business, but for the whole country. In the beginning of the crisis, when we started to, in December, in China, we moved quickly by making pre-orders for the following year. We were for fear of the increase of the crisis. We had some kind of sense that a little bit early on, but in February and March in 2020, the crisis magnitude became larger and factories were closed because of the crisis. This is globally, and also the largest of which is in China. Demand for tech devices, such as computers, iPads, and devices globally, not only in Saudi Arabia, and this has also caused a problem in that the demand is way higher than supply. The factories in the world could face that sharp demand, because it went from 50 to 100% for PCs, laptops, and it was a crisis of unmatched magnitude. And of course, it's not easy to raise the capacity to 50% or 100%, because the devices or computers and iPads were in some sort of recession over the past 10 years, and then all of a sudden they became in 100% demand. Then we faced other challenges, such as finding suppliers or courier companies. Of course, there are courier companies, but the airplanes that helped us stopped, and that also caused another different problem, because transportation became in itself a major problem, especially for these devices that people need very quickly in order to continue the progress and of work and study. All our departments moved swiftly in Jarir, because people were staying at home, and people, in addition to education and working virtually, that they started to need, for example, things that they never used before. Immediately, since the declaration of the lockdown, we moved to ensure that we protect our staff and our showrooms. These unprecedented measures made our purchases department think outside of the box, and very swiftly. So here and in the GCC countries, we bought most of what we can do from the wholesalers and retailers. And then we enhanced our e-commerce. And therefore, if it was not available, then we had to provide it and to make it available to supply the needs of the citizens. Of course, the workers had to work 16 hours a day, each one reshaping their plans to address the urgency or the in purchases, in procurement or e-commerce or the data center, the showrooms and the services, all aspects of the work, especially the health security. So we can say that you had a contingency plan for such situation. Of course, it was a sort of, like, I would say 25% preparation, because we could sense the problem in December 2019 in China, but we never expected that the magnitude of the problem would be that big. However, this kind of early perception of the crisis put us on the right track, so that we worked long hours. I haven't seen my team exhausted in the first 60 days. They were extremely exhausted and under pressure. We're going to come back to your way of managing that, but let me move now to the Minister of Finance. There is an important question being in the decision-making circle. How do you see the impact of the decisions and measures taken by the government of Saudi Arabia to alleviate the outcomes or the impact of this crisis on the financial performance, especially that we are in December, the last
شكرا جزيلا. أنا أول شيء بس ودي
Thank you. I would like first
أداعب وأكرم شوية وأقول إذا كان القطاع الخاص يقول ما مرينا بأزمة واشتغلنا 12 ساعة في اليوم لمدة 60 يوم، أنا أقول له الحكومة في المملكة الآن 16 ساعة هي العادية، هي المعتاد.
16 hours is what is normal.
الحمد لله. يعني بشكل عام لا والله أنا يعني سواء القطاع الخاص والقطاع الحكومي كان متضافر بشكل كبير جدا، والله وأقولها لا مجاملة ولا تجمل. أعتقد كان في تكامل واضح في المملكة العربية السعودية بين القطاع الخاص والقطاع العام لمواجهة تحديات الأزمة. فيما يتعلق بالحكومة على وجه التحديد، أعتقد كان التدخل واضح جدا، وأنا ودي أعطي بعض الأمثلة. المثال الإجمالي لو ننظر إلى مستوى الحزم التحفيزية اللي قدمتها الحكومة خلال الأزمة اللي تجاوزت تقريبا 200 مليار ريال، تعادل تقريبا يمكن 3 من الناتج المحلي الإجمالي للمملكة مقارنة مع متوسط في دول مجموعة ال20 على سبيل المثال تتجاوز تقريبا 9% من الناتج المحلي. هذا انتقدوا عليه ناس كثير وقالوا انه المفروض السعوديه كانت انفقت اكثر على خدمه التحفيز، لكن كان ردنا واضح انه كمان الحكومه كانت جاهزه للاستهداف والاستهداف المباشر للقطاعات الاكثر تاثرا، وبالتالي نظرنا الى الاثر. لو ننظر الى الاثر ما هو وضع الاقتصاد السعودي بنهاية 2020 مقارنة بدول العشرين اللي متوسطها أنفق 9% من الناتج المحلي الإجمالي كحزم تحفيز. احنا أنفقنا تقريبا 3.4. الناتج إنه المملكة العربية السعودية بالرغم من إنه أنفقنا تقريبا أقل من نصف متوسط ما أنفقته الدول الأخرى كنسبة، إلا إنه إحنا من أفضل دول مجموعة العشرين في نهاية السنة في ناحية الانكماش. غالبا ستنتهي سنة 20 باقتصاد منخفض تقريبا ب 3.2% من الناتج المحلي الإجمالي مقارنة مع متوسط دول 20 تقريبا 6 أو أكثر من 6%. وبالتالي كان الأثر واضح، تدخل الحكومة كان واضح، مركز، يبحث عن الناس أو القطاعات الأكثر تأثرا ويركز عليها الدعم. الدعم كان على شرائح مختلفة تماما. استخدمنا الحكومة، البنك المركزي تدخل كجهة مستقلة أيضا لتوفير السيولة والتأكد من انتظام قطاع المصرف للسيولة فيه. استخدمنا صناديق التنمية الوطنية أيضا لدعم مجال اختصاصها في توفير الدعم للقطاع الخاص زي ما تكلم مع الأخ بندر. تضافرت الجهود بشكل عام وكان لها أثر ممتاز. أنا ما ودي أتكلم عنه كثير، ودي أسمع من أبو أكرم والزملاء في القطاع الخاص يمكن يتكلمون عنه أكثر مصداقية من كلامي عنه، لكن أنا شخصيا راضي عنه. لماذا؟ ليس لأنه أنا من الحكومة، لكن الآن أرى نتائجه. الأرقام الشهرية والإحصاءات الشهرية وحتى الأسبوعية واليومية اللي تصدر من مؤسسة النصر وغيرها من هيئة الإحصاء العامة تقول أنه بوادر التعافي من الأزمة في المملكة السعودية مبشرة بشكل كبير جدا. مؤشر ثقة مدراء المشتريات ارتفع بشكل كبير جدا في نوفمبر، أعلى نسبة من يناير هذا العام. فالمؤشرات الحمد لله إيجابية، لكن في نفس الوقت تبقى الحكومة منتبهة تماما. نعرف أن الأزمة لم تنتهي، ولذلك حريصين جدا على أن ننتبه بقدر ما أنه نفتح الاقتصاد ونعيد النشاط الاقتصادي وندعم إعادة النشاط الاقتصادي. نرغب أن نتفادى الإغلاق مرة ثانية، وبالتالي يعني نشيد بالجميع صراحة اتخاذ أكثر إجراءات احترازية، تباعد اجتماعي، لبس الكمامة وخلافه، لأنه هذا هو السلاح اللي سيخدمنا لتفادي إغلاق آخر لا قدر الله.
Here I'm going to move to the Minister.
من التشريعات لتعزيز استدامة القطاع الصناعي والمحلي والخدمات المرتبطة فيه. كيف ترى أثرها خلال فترة الجائحة تحديدا؟ خصوصا أنكم وزارة تعتبر وليدة.
That you and the Minister that is recently established ministry. That's true, Brother Mohammed, and I think this newly established ministry is facing this challenge in the beginning of its journey, and maybe nowadays those days will not be forgotten by those who work with us in the ministry from the very beginning. And as is the case with any newly established ministry, as we are trying to establish a new, very important governing body that will oversee a number of very important issues, comes this pandemic to complicate things more. But with the collaborative efforts and now we see that in the sector, in the mineral resources sector, we have gained many advantages since the launching of the vision of the Kingdom of 2030. A number of legislations have been administered to promote the position of those sectors, the mineral sector and the industrial sector. Both share two characteristics or two challenges, rather. The first, that those challenges need major capital investments and it also needs long-term investments. Therefore, the legislations have taken that into consideration, beginning from the restructure of the industrial fund to acknowledge all the needs of the next period, and to enhance the kingdom's capabilities in the energy sector. We have raised the capital of the fund to reach 105 billion. Also, they newly established the new export-import banks to reach the global markets, and also in concurrence with the state efforts to increase the local content by engaging in different activities with the industrial and the mineral sector. Another aspect of that is the Foreign Trade Committee, or Foreign Trade Commission rather, to enhance the kingdom position in trade in general, and also to protect the markets from unfair competition, and also the mineral investment system that has been launched recently. And we are very excited that by the beginning of next year, we'll launch similar programs. And as we have seen by the end of 2019, when the state took the financial burden, that has a positive impact on the sector. And specifically during this pandemic, we have seen that the industrial sector was the least impacted by this pandemic, since during the current year we were able to create new opportunities for employment, issuing more than 150 industrial licensing. And regardless of its, the fact that it's newly established, we still say that this pandemic was a true test for us, as we conducted a number of electronic transactions. I believe that this pandemic, no doubt, is a great challenge. It had an impact, or different impacts rather, that were negative, but also I would say that it presented some challenges. Now we see that the kingdom, no doubt, has proved that we have the right local components and the minimum number of industries needed by all the citizens and expats. And during this pandemic, we're able to test the competency of the industrial sector to face such challenges. Some industries, such as the mask industry, to have their production increased by a tenfold with the participation of the private sector, and to given the appropriate support in lending and the government procurement programs. All of that maybe had helped us to overcome the current situation, and we are hoping now, as we enter in, that you established for the a big launch rather for the, if you may, for the industrial sector. His Excellency the Minister of Finance have mentioned the stimulus packages given by the state to support the economy. How did those economical, financial measures taken by the government to mitigate the effects of the pandemic on the private sector? Well, you didn't allow me, but the Customs and Enforcement Authority have facilitated the import and export process during the pandemic, and supported the supply chain rapidly and with great concern. That's the point that I wanted to mention. I must give everyone their right to. How did that help with the economical aspects? It was a very rapid movement, if you may. and we were counting the hours, the days, but the movement by the government was rapid on all levels to maintain opportunities to employment, to maintain the economy and the supply chain. The first initiative, of course, was of great importance, and that was the Senate program that provided 60% of salaries for those in the private sector, as has been explained by the Labor Department or the Labor Ministry, have explained and crystallized the relationship between the private sector and the government, and given days off those government employees, paid vacation for those employees. That was another initiative. It was the monetary authority and now the central bank. In regards to the points of sale, it was extended to an extra 3 months that had resulted in saving 8.5 billion reais. And also there was a delay of loans payments, delaying the VAT and also the zakat and the taxes for 3 months, and to extend the financial coverage for delays 62 billion, saving 300,000 of the lending expenses that have resulted in the increments in liquidity, expanding the expats residency permits for 3 months. As a national crisis, of course, the company prays to Allah to support the Ministry of Health Fund by 20 million, and also working with the Communication Ministry, trying to support the Ministry by 25 million. So trying to pay back in the form of the support that we were given at the beginning. So the procedures were inclusive to protect the sector, and it was rapid and clear. Your Excellency, the Minister of Finance, a question that is very repetitive. The repercussions of 2020, did it change any of the targets or the objectives of 2030, of the vision of 2030? And what is the impact of the vision on the economical status of the kingdom? If you may shorten your answer, because we only have
شكرا جزيلا. الإجابة المختصرة نعم. الإجابة المختصرة إنه البرامج التي تم إطلاقها من 4 أو 5 سنوات كان لها أثر مباشر وحاسم في قدرة المملكة والحكومة والوطن على مواجهة الأزمة. وبعطيك مثال واحد فقط. الاستثمارات التي تمت خلال 3 سنوات في البنية التحتية الرقمية والألياف البصرية دعمت الحكومة بمليارات لتمديدها وإيصالها لأكبر عدد من المساكن وقطاع الأعمال. كان لها أثر واضح جدا في استمرار التعليم واستمرار القطاع الصحي واستمرار الأعمال بلا انقطاع، والتحول من الحالة الواقعية للحالة الفيرتشوال اللي احنا الآن نستخدمها بأقل أثر سلبي ممكن. برامج الرؤية بشكل عام مستمرة، في توقفت بعض البرامج والمشاريع في خلال فترة الإغلاق بسبب حماية الأرواح، لكن عادت بشكل كبير جدا. أقدر أقول لك إنه بعض البرامج إلى نهاية نوفمبر أنفقت أكثر من 93% من الميزانية المخصصة لها في 11 شهر. الإنفاق ماشي زي ما هو مقرر، الخطط ماشية زي ما هو مقرر، لأنها خطط طويلة المدى يجب لا تتوقف، ورأينا فائدتها بشكل واضح خلال
during the past period. Thank you, Excellency. Your Excellency, Mr. Badr, you talked about the local content of the supply chain. During this pandemic, those 2 terms have been repeated excessively. What is the importance of the increase of the local content, and what are the gains in this field specifically, since the whole world is now trying to increase their local content on the level on state level? No doubt that this pandemic has proven the soundness of the initiatives of the kingdom in the industrial sector. Our strategy in regards to industrial sector is one of the most important components is to nationalize a great portion of the goods that we import and the things that support the national industry policy are two things. First is the local content, as I mentioned, and now the local content commission today, as a new establishment, had started to execute the first government procurement program, and we started to feel the impact of this policy on the steadiness of demand we made on all the goods. This is a sector that heavily relies on stability of the demand, and now the local content commission have specific tools that deals with such issues in regards to the local content through the mechanisms that we have undertaken in the beginning. But there are some other tools that promote investment, such as the mandatory list, and it's based on a number of factors that allows for some of the products to be available based on this mandatory list that the contractors must secure to stay committed to this list. And this gives the investors reassurance of their investments. There's also another path in regards to the structural agreements, and all of those tools will have a great impact. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, a portion of the investments that we currently have, and we have noticed during this year, the 600 licenses that were given to new investments is amounts up to a great portion of the overall investments in the sector. So we can say that the local content phase have started, and we have already passed the. I just want to add a quick point. During 2020, 11,000 government contacts the local content rules were applied to. So now we're in the execution process, the planning process. His Excellency Mohammed Jadan want to hear from you, and now their Excellency want to hear from you. What are the challenges that you expect to face after we're done with this pandemic? You have mentioned the procedures and precautions. So what is next? What do you expect next so that the planning will be appropriate? Of course, challenges that face the sector once we are done with this pandemic. If you talk about Jadid company specifically, we talk about the private sector. The private sector is different. Of course, if we talk about the malls, for example, are we talking about SMEs, or are we talking about the fashion sector, or limited liability companies? Of course, technology will play a great role in the next phase. But then again, the businesses that had closures were greatly impacted, and those who did not have any channels for e-commerce. Of course, real estate did suffer, and the commercial sector in general was affected. We have seen some companies that had benefit from this pandemic. The situation itself had helped those companies. The food delivery business has benefited, catering business benefited, but of course, this is related to the pandemic, not the what the government has set as far as the policies and the procedures. Of course, we still need and also study I apologize because we have a limited time. I just want to go over the last few questions. Your Excellency, the Minister of Finance, what is the most important characteristics of this Saudi economy post the pandemic, and what are the challenges of the future?
شغلتين وبختصرها أقل من دقيقة ونص. واحد أنه ثبت أيضا بشكل واضح أنه ما قامت فيه الحكومة من ناحية الاستدامة المالية والاستقرار المالي مهم جدا لمواجهة الصدمات. القوة المالية للحكومة كان لها أثر فاعل في مواجهة صدمة كورونا ومواجهة صدمة انخفاض أسعار البترول، وبالتالي من المهم جدا المحافظة على القوة المالية للحكومة. النقطة الثانية تمكين القطاع الخاص، ومن المهم جدا زي ما قال معالي وزير الصناعة التركيز هو على أن يقوم القطاع الخاص في حمل الاقتصاد في المستقبل أكثر مما تقوم فيه الحكومة. دور الحكومة هو التشريع والتنظيم والرقابة، القطاع الخاص هو دوره يقوم بالعمل. شكرا.
And the private sector is the one protecting everyday business. The Minister of the Industry, how did the pandemic affect the industrial investment? Did you feel any change in the flow of investments in your sector? And what does the ministry do now to take advantage of this, what has happened during the pandemic? So what are the incentives given to attract investment? I believe that the pandemic, regardless of the challenges that we have undertaken, the investors understand the soundness of the market. The government investments in regards to the infrastructure and the financial capabilities are clear. And now this clarity that we see is one of the best sectors, promising sectors. So the challenge now is a global challenge of how to attract global investment, because the whole world now is as an open field for all to compete. And this is what are we working on in harmony with our colleagues in the Ministry of Investment. So we have clear plans, and hopefully we'll be able to take advantage of those opportunities, those challenges, to nationalize many of those industries to attract more investments that are seeking new uncharted territories to diversify our risks. Mr. Mohammed Al-Agil, how are you preparing for the second wave, especially that the economical impact still a burden on the local economy? There are a great deal of immunization, if you may, specifically the e-commerce. We have learned many new things during this period. So we will be able to expand our supply chain. Some models that we have learned from other countries, maybe they have different circumstances, instead of focusing our efforts on one or two countries. Thank you. I thank the Minister of Finance. I thank Mr. Bandar Al-Tayyib, the Minister of Industry, and Mr. Mohammed Agil, the CEO of Tari, and our thanks extending for the Central Bank to giving them this opportunity for this very important economical and financial gathering that we are having here today. Thank you for listening.
تفضل.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله
Peace be upon
وبركاته.
you and good evening and welcome to the 5th Financial Stability Forum in the second session. As you all know, the Corona pandemic has affected all the aspects of economy on a global level, and its effects had extended in a manner that was never seen by the globe, and it made this year and all the events that happened and all the exceptional decisions with all that the world needs, and that has reached the local and the global money market. In the light of those repercussions, the governments have acted, the central banks have acted, and all the organizational and government bodies have acted on this unprecedented pandemic as they try to support most of the financial institutions and mitigate the impact of the pandemic, and also to ensure the financial sustainability and to further discuss those issues. We are joined by the governor of the Central Bank, His Excellency Dr. Levi, and His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Guez, Chairman of the Capital Market Authority, and Mr. Badr Al, Chief Executive Officer of Saudi Oryx Leasing Company. Welcome all. And now my first question in this session to the Governor of the Saudi Central Bank, His Excellency Dr. Al. Now we are talking about the financial stability, and maybe we'd like to understand more about the role of the central bank and what is your evaluation of the financial situation in the kingdom, and what are the challenges that faces the financial stability as we see in this pandemic on a global level, and what are the best precautionary measures, the best practices undertaken by the central bank to ensure financial stability. Then I have a lot of those questions. Thank you. And maybe I will try to define the financial stability first. So it is a great focus now to give a definition of the financial stability and what would happen in case there was an interruption of that stability, as we are trying to avoid any disruption in the financial market. The banking sector specifically we will be able to achieve this financial stability, and of course this is of a very important fact as we are trying to ensure that we are protecting the savings of our citizens. The problematic issue in the beginning is that trying to understand whether the financial sector was stable, and sometimes you don't feel that fact unless you lose that stability, and this is one of the challenges that we are faced with for the financial makers and the regulators. The interest of that matter has started at the end of the Asian money market crisis and the global financial crisis. The World Bank and the IMF had started the evaluation of the financial sector program, and the kingdom was one of the countries that were part of this evaluation. At the end of 2008, there was the Council of the Financial Stability was added another building block for those who set the standards and the principles for the financial stability and for the banking sector. Of course, the Financial Stability Council and Basel Committee have worked on a number of measures and have developed after the crisis of 2008, and I believe that we have learned a lot from this crisis, and those standards were, it might be one of the obstacles that has given the financial sector a great deal of ability to such crisis, including the current crisis. This, of course, the banking sector or the financial sector cannot work in the face of such crisis without an intervention by the supervisory government bodies such as the central bank. When the corona pandemic started, the biggest fear was the continuity of the financial sector and the banking sector specifically to continue providing lending and financing. There was a doubt about their ability to do so. So the programs have focused on that fact and to protect the financial sector from bankruptcy. And the focus was on SMEs. So we have started since March 2020. And on a personal level, I believe that the financial sector here in the kingdom is stable, but we are monitoring all the indicators very closely. We must be use precaution, and hopefully we have not got to a point of no return because the crisis is still here. As far as the challenges, there are many, but one of the challenges that were faced with at the beginning of the crisis is the full closure, and that the biggest concern for us was that in addition to provide the support for the SMEs, the ability of those SMEs to be able to continue support for those for the SMEs and not to affect the banking sector consequently. And we have seen the indicators, the private sector indicators have seen a deduction in all the indicators, and most of the impacted sectors, especially in Mecca and Medina, the religious tourism sector was affected. Also, the retail sector. Some of the supply chains were disrupted. Of course, the banking sector is highly correlated to those sectors. So those challenges that was at peak in the beginning of this crisis have seen a sharp decline in the impact, and the central bank, some of the surplus packages given by the central bank in the beginning still continues to be provided for those sectors. And we have a number of precautionary policies and procedures that we are continuously conducted, and specifically during crisis time. And now we must be able to monitor the quality of the assets of some of the private sector. In the lending sector have increased from 1.9 to 1.99, and we also must ensure the cost of the finance that we believe that is still continuing to be impactful due to the policies set by the central bank. My question is to the chairman of the Capital Market Authority, Mr. Mohammed Guiz. Now, the market authority is reflecting the financial situation in the kingdom, and especially when there are crises, there's always a concern about the money markets. As a money market authority, what are the greatest concerns for you during this year as far as the financial stability? Thank you, Brother Abdullah, and all the audience and the participants. When we talk about the greatest points of fear during the current year, as has been mentioned by His Excellency the government, it's all focused about the repercussions of the pandemic, whether they were health repercussions or economical repercussions. And if we look at the money markets specifically, we'll see that the repercussions were at main three axes. First, the impact on the profitability of the companies, and the second was the market indicator in general, and the third was about the liquidity and the investment behavior. So we start with the first axis, and the impact of the profitability of the companies and its performance, as has mentioned by His Excellency the Governor. The profitability of the companies did decline from the beginning of the year, and until the Q3, all the listed company profits has seen a sharp decline in profits by 50% compared to past year. But the great variation that we have seen between the current times of the pandemic now and the previous declines in the past, that the decline during this period did not affect all the companies of all the sectors, because there were some clear exceptions. For example, the sector of communication, the sector of information technology, the health sector, the food industries, all those sectors did increase their profits compared to previous years. And also here, also in the money market authority, even some of the companies that are not listed, they have seen a sharp increase in their profits by 50% during the current year, regardless that the negatively impacted sectors were more than those had seen a positive impact. But the role for the money market authority, whether for those who have seen a decline or an increase, our role is to allow for all the financing challenge and for those companies so they'd be able to combat this pandemic, whether they had a negative or positive impact. So that's why we have worked during the past year to ensure that all the necessary financing channels are available for the companies to face this pandemic. This includes the traditional channels, such as the we have seen that increase from the beginning of the year, has increased by 35% compared to the same time of past year. And this includes also the alternative financing channels, such as the investment funds, as we have seen an increase by 30% compared to last year. And also in the debt market, which is the most recent market and the smallest of all, we have seen an increase in the number of the public offerings that have increased by 150% in the first 3 quarters of the year compared to the same period of last year. And even the collective financing platforms that has opened a new branch of finances for the SMEs, the financing has increased by 20% compared to the same period of last year. Of course, all of this is related to the decline in the profitability of the companies, and what we have should done or could have done by providing numerous financial channels. Of course, there's another element in this equation of the repercussions of this pandemic and the impact of that on the market indicators, because the decline of the profits of the profits that had reached 50%, but the market indicator did not decline accordingly, but it did decline by only 1%. So this might be because the increase of liquidity in the money market or in the economy in general, or that might be a sign as far as the expectations of the main players in the market, as they feel that the recovery from this pandemic was due. The third axis, as far as the repercussions of the pandemic that we have seen recently, is the increase of the levels of liquidity in the market. Even though that increase is something positive, we consider it as positive, what we have seen that this liquidity might not be appropriate with the profitability and the performance of such entities. Some of the behaviors have changed that have engaged in some fraudulent activities. That's why the authority have increased its supervisory and inspection procedures to ensure that it's dealt with appropriately, and that to protect all the
those who deal in the market, and we will get into more details once we finish our procedures.
أستاذ بدر سويلم، بحكم القطاع الخاص اليوم وكيف أثرت أزمة كورونا عليكم كقطاع شركات تمويل، كيف ساهمت الإجراءات اللي تم اتخاذها في الحد من أثرها أو أثر الجائحة على القطاع المالي؟ كيف ترونها أنتم اليوم؟ How did these measures were able to, when we talk about the financing sector? First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me, and it is my great honor to be in presence of Dr. Ahmed Al-Khulaifi, the governor of the Saudi Central Bank, and Mr. Mohammed Al-Gouais, the CEO of CMA, and I would like to greet all our participants, and I hope, like, my contribution is going to add something useful. In terms of the impact of Corona on the financing sector, yes, we have been impacted in the financing sector, and probably our sector was one of the most that work under the umbrella of the central bank in terms of its suffering of this pandemic, because a big number of companies in this sector are SMEs, and consequently their ability to take the shock varies in other sectors. As to how it impacted, the client's impact is the main cause as financing companies, but because of the SMEs in the kingdom represent a big chunk of our clientele, of our financing portfolios, and this had a great consequence for these companies because of the default cases, in addition to the delay of payments and the increased risks of the depreciation of the market value of the leased assets for the clients of the financing companies. This, in general, in terms of the impact, the credit impact, these companies were also impacted in terms of operation, especially during the lockdown. There were requirements that required in-person presence, such as registering assets or leases, or visiting government agencies or offices, or signing contracts, and also inspecting assets prepared for leasing, in addition to other procedures which became more complicated during the lockdown. We were impacted, of course. This very simply and very quickly describing how the crisis affected our companies. As for the second question regarding how the measures taken participated in alleviating this impact, undoubtedly the swift movement by the central bank and the daring decisions and innovative decisions played a major role in containment of the problem early on. And what characterizes these measures is that, to a great extent, they were dealing with the core of the problem that we suffered in the financing sector, which is the SMEs. For us, the main part of support, or the programs that have softened the impact for those in question, was the deferred payments program, which was launched in March, and consequently we have delayed the payments or due payments for SMEs for 6 months. The second program was the secure loan program, which played a role in providing low-cost cash flow for the highest categories, or for the biggest categories of SMEs. The first program alleviated pressure on cash and gave it time to catch their breath. And the second program provided the low-cost cash in the most needed of times. Thank you. Your Excellency, Dr. Ahmed. Today, the economy, of course, suffered from this pandemic, and probably one of the most important worrying things is the levels of cash flow in the economy. There was great worry about the provision, whether it was enough to handle the situation. Did you, during this crisis, felt a serious worry about levels of cash, therefore you had special measures taken? You, in general, how does the central bank deal with this risk or threat, whether it was there or probably its probability? And will you continue if, for example, we have enhancement measures? Are these going to continue in the future or what? As for dealing with cash, it could be liquidity. It could be probably before June, before the partial opening and after June. Before June, what we focused on was the payment deferment program for SMEs and the support for e-payments in order to incentivize and activate commercial and services. After June, after the opening partially and then the complete opening, SAMA had to interfere by injecting cash flow in the banking sector and enabling the financial companies to give loans. And then you know that we have injected 50 billion riyals, and let alone other programs. Our target at that time was that these impacted sector, and probably the banks were also impacted and faced difficulties, plus there were some other organizations or installments at that time SAMA did not devise programs for, which is the big businesses. So we took some measures and gave some directives to the banks, but we helped them at the same time by giving them cash flow in order to satisfy the needs and fill the gaps in case they appeared. The levels of cash flow are always carefully watched by the central bank for numerous reasons, because cash flow could be the area where to destabilize the financial stability, but the fiscal stability, and it could create an inflation. Therefore, we have to maintain it. So during this recession, we had to inject cash flow, and then, of course, part of the measures which we have taken was lowering the cost of interest or the interest rates. So in addition to other programs of facilitation, such as easy loans, we also opened the open market policies for the first time, and that was programmed for more than 1 year, but we started, and this is one of the sustainable programs, and it will be open through which the banks can enter SAMA and obtain loans in case they had cash flow. In addition to what we have injected, the fluency that the currency that we injected. The levels are very satisfying, whether the cash flow in the economy or the coverage in the banking sector. So if we, for example, look at the indices that we watch, one of which is the cash mass, it went by over 5%. The purchasing contracts by SAMA are above the normal average. The coverage of cash flow in the sector, the banks, is 190% more, but what is accepted by Basel is 100%. But we are still watching the cash flow. We know that it is satisfying and assuring, and one of the indices that we see is that probably some cash that is looking for opportunity. But again, we have to keep a watchful eye locally and globally. Any negative developments can impact the cash flow. We haven't reached a point where we are fully assured to withdraw this cash, because the apprehension is one of the challenges that face the fiscal policies maker, that the time to withdraw this cash. Thank you. And then we can probably say today that the cash standards levels are assuring, and we don't have to worry for these. They are sufficient. A question to the CMA CEO. Probably the question is raised by many people, is what's taking place in the stock market. So from the crisis and the decline that happened during the heart of the crisis until today, we've seen fluctuations. We can also say that we have seen major or sharp increases with some fluctuations, probably the most important of which is the increase of dealings that were surprising to many in the heart of the crisis, that will impact the operations, especially the non-permanent clients. From your experience, what are the reasons that led to these fluctuations and these increases in cash? Thank you, Mr. Abdullah. And your previous question to the governor of Sama was about the level of cash flow, and probably what we are witnessing in the fiscal market is a reflection of the levels of cash flow which we see either in the economy or in the fiscal market or financial market. But if we take a broader perspective, we would see that in the market, and recently, is probably ascribed to four main collaborating reasons. The first is that was prior to the pandemic, which is the introduction of cash flow by foreigners as a result of opening our market for foreign investment. Because since 2019 until the end of third quarter in 2020, the Saudi market attracted levels of 150 billion riyals. This cash flow had a very clear impact, or positive impact, on the mechanisms and works. The second reason was the reduction or the decline of the interest rates locally and globally, which made the stock markets and these in the world more attractive. The third reason was the continuity of the market's efforts and works, and virtually, especially with the what happened to other businesses, it opened up opportunities for individuals, especially with some of the investment other choices impact, whether the operational or the real estate investments, as an outcome of the VAT increase in the second half of the year. The fourth and last is that the pandemic, and due to its nature, created diverse and changing expectations regarding the swiftness of recovery and the level of profitability for companies, and the change there. This change, or these fluctuating expectations, opened up the opportunity for dealings that were at a higher rate than in normal situations. All these four reasons started to affect the market in terms of increasing the cash flow, or increasing the fluctuation, or increasing the individual investments. And it seems that other markets around the world are going through the same experience for similar reasons. As I mentioned, this is probably not a very worrying issue. However, the only worrying exception is that what we saw in some companies, in companies whose cash flow and mobility is not commensurate to their profitability and their future prospects, especially that the cash is done by somebody. And now we are trying to monitor some suspected cases in collaboration with security authorities in order to refer them to the concerned authorities. Therefore, I would like to take this opportunity here to remind everyone of the importance of not following behind any unjustified increases or unjustified or unratified rumors or information, because in most cases the objectives are illegal. I want to talk about the importance of collaborating with all the participants in the market, financial organizations, either for awareness against these practices or their threats, or to report any violations. And this can happen through our official website in a way that maintains the confidentiality of the reports. Thank you, Mr. Badr. As you have mentioned about the financial sector, how they benefited from the incentive packages which you talked about in details. Could you quickly tell us about the impact on your sector, and most importantly, which I would like to know, what is the impact and what do you expect after the end of these packages for you? No doubt the impact was very big, and as you have said, it was from the credit aspect, for the clients, and also operationally in terms of the inability to do the daily work because of the hours of lockdown. As for the incentive packages and support, had great benefits for our sector and also for the SMEs. And of course, I'm speaking here about because I was seeing that face to face with these SMEs, the impact was very negative for most of these businesses. You can imagine a small business that relies on daily income to a great extent in order to pay their commitments, and all of a sudden they went through an unprecedented crisis, almost total halt of sales. However, they have commitments, they have supplies, they have shortage of supplies, they have salaries to pay, they have bills to pay. In the eye of this storm, you come to defer their payments without any extra cost, and you also provide extra low-cost financing in order to help them satisfy the requirements of the working capital. I believe that was a life belt which came right in time and in the right way. For the financing companies, of course, the benefit was very big. The central bank protected these companies from these problems faced by the SMEs by deferring their payments and by providing the secure loans, in addition to depositing equal amounts for the deferred payments that are under the program. They were deposited for our financing companies, and that alleviated to a great extent the negative impact or the losses of these delays, and that gave also the financing companies a comfortable payment schedules in order to absorb the shock. Our expectations at the end of these incentives, I believe the only negativity has been also softened to a great extent by extending the deferment program twice. It was launched in March for 6 months until the end of September, and in September it was extended to December, and now in December we're extending that to March of 2021, plus the continuation of the secure loans as was planned. I believe if the economy continues to improve and recover at the same rate, and I believe, inshallah, that by the end of these initiatives, the impact is going to be very limited. So the SMEs will come back to pay according to schedule, as was planned. Thank you. We have 4 questions and we're trying to finish them on time. Your Excellency, the Governor, today, over the next few years, we have noticed a great increase in the real estate loans and the impact on the economy. However, there was a big growth which was felt in the real estate loans. This big growth, in light of a recession or a stagnation, that we might have a stagnation in GDP, but at the same time, we have an inflation in the consumer prices. And we have expected unemployment rates that might be high somehow. Is the continuity of these loans worrying in light of this environment of unemployment or recession? Is it worrying, or is it something normal and in control? The real estate loans in 2015 represented about 13% of the overall mass of private sector loans, and now they are amounting to 23%, even higher than consumer loans. The real estate loans started at lower rates and then increased, and it represents about now 16% of the total of the compared globally, it is considered good. We started, as I mentioned, from lower standards with the support programs, either provided by the strategy of housing or other, in fact, led to provision of cash in the banking sector, which is directed towards the real estate loan. This is a very important sector in the economy, of course. Real estate is a treasure of value, and maintaining that is something very good. So we are partners with the Ministry of Housing in their housing program, and we also participate with other opinions. The central bank offered a number of precautionary measures that helped to generate a number of real estate loans. Probably if we look during the first 3 quarters of this fiscal year, the first 3 quarters in 2019 increased by over 50%. Is this worrying? Of course, the more loans, and if we don't have in fact, a good securement, then we might be worried. However, this has good results, either by being supported by the housing programs or by providing support, or even the legislative regulations and also in the legal system help to guarantee rights in case of discrepancy. This helps us in terms of the responsible financing principles, which we implement very strictly. It doesn't mean that we are watching the moving and fluctuating changes in these loans, and we look to them as productive loans, as was mentioned. Previously, they were about 8%, about 4 or 5 years, but now they are double this rate. Therefore, we watch it very closely. And as we see, the real estate loans this year go beyond or higher than the real estate loans, which is a good index of the best use of the capital and loans. Thank you, Your Excellency, and I would like to ask Mr. Mohammed Al Gouwais. Your Excellency, the Saudi market and the Saudi stock market seen crucial developments. Most importantly is launching some companies and the derivatives market launch. There was some kind of probably worry or maybe unawareness by dealers about the impact of these developments on the market in general and on the dealers and the clients of the stock market. What can we say are the outcomes of this market, especially the derivatives market? Please let me, before we talk about the derivatives, I would like to take a step back to see the developments in the stock markets globally, because we notice that most global stock markets, the development takes 3 cycles or 3 waves or 3 phases. The first is usually by developing an effective stock market. The second phase or wave is by developing the loans market, and the third one is by developing a derivatives market. So now, if we put this in our perspective, we find that, thank God, we are living with a pure financial market, or in terms of the magnitude and cash, it is very strong and promising. We started over a few years to activate the loans market as a subsidiary for the fiscal financial market, and the current situation launched the third phase, which is the financial derivatives market launch, which started by launching the first derivatives, which is the future contracts market. Now, what is the importance of the first 2 phases? They are clear, but as for derivatives, the benefit lies in the ability of the participants to divide their risks related to the financial market and to move these risks from one who doesn't want it to someone who is willing to take these risks, and therefore it becomes an effective tool for protection against these risks and an effective means of investment strategies that might not be in the hands of the dealers or clients unless these were available. Speaking about the benefits and advantages, of course, we can talk also equally about the risks and the challenges. And if we talk about financial derivatives, we have 2 types of risks. The first category of risks are those related to financial stability, which is the subject of our forum. And the second group of risks is the ones related to the client's convenience. So if we start with the first regarding the financial stability, we notice in general that most important sources of risks in derivatives related to financial stability come from the availability of a derivatives market which is dealt with unorganizedly and outside the stock market and without centralization. So this makes it important to develop a derivatives market that we are all keen to organize this by restricting that to the stock market in an organized way, and it has to go through a central forum or company which was created here recently. Because the role of this company is extremely important to cases of defaulting as a result of dealing with these financial derivatives that take place outside it. Also, it is reflected, Your Excellency, we don't have enough time. I would like to take the last 2 questions. So if we can maybe move on quickly now to Mr. Badr. We would like in less than 1 minute. What is the role of the financial companies? They are always accused of not dealing well with SMEs. What is your role in this situation? Very briefly. The role of the financing companies is key and important. The financing sector is about 50 billion and the facilitation is over 11 billion for SMEs. Our role is multifaceted. First, we activate the support programs launched by the central bank and applying these to all the deserving categories. Second, supporting the other organizations that do not fall under the terms and conditions of the support programs. Third, flexibility in rescheduling default loans, and suspending the legal procedures against companies that defaulted on their payments, which is important, that help the stability of these organizations. And finally, suspending the assets reclaim process to support their operations and to help them to recover their businesses. Now the question to the governor. We have worries today of a second wave of the pandemic. If it happened, what are your plans to face this second wave? And will we have other measures different from what we've done? Are there going to be an extension, or what are your plans here? First, we hope that there is going to be no second wave for the pandemic, God willing. However, if it happened and it requires intervention, of course we are going to intervene. And I believe the wave is the worst that we have seen so far, is the worst wave. However, we are still, of course, living a situation of uncertainty, but there is a cautious hope after the existence or discovery of vaccines. What we see is that there are some positive results for the financial stability, and the financial sector focused on that. Thank God that the financial stability is still standing, and there are indicators that might impact the profitability of the banking sector. However, these they do not jeopardize the financial stability. And with the continuation of loans, that the financial sector in itself, with all the cash flow indicators that we spoke about, if we look at the programs that were injected by SAMA, that we have provided about 30 billion riyals for these programs. Over 87,000 SMEs benefited from that. The financing program had 13 billions. We spent 4 billion out of that, which means we are in a very good situation. The other programs, about 800 and 700 contracts issued by 18 billion riyals. In sum, we want to maintain watching the financial sector in order to play its role, and in case of a second wave, we are fully prepared. Unfortunately, we couldn't take more questions. However, I would like to express my appreciation and thanks to the governor of the SAMA, Dr. Ahmed Al-Khulaifi, His Excellency, the head of the CMA, Mr. Mohammed Gouez, and Mr. Badr Aswalim, the CEO of Oryx. Thank you very much. Thank you, and thanks to our guests, and we hope to see you in other forums. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
In the name of Allah, the most gracious and most merciful, I welcome all in the third session of the Financial Stability Forum that focused on the impacts of the pandemic on economical and financial level. On the third session, we will focus on using the financial technologies and the impact of the pandemic, of the acceleration or the expedition of the use of financial channels and using the digitalization, and this will incentivize the investments in of the SMEs of the financial technologies. To review or all the aspects of this topic, we have with us in this session Mr. Ziad Yusuf, Deputy Governor for Development and Technology at SAMA, and also we have with us Ms. Jude Meg, Director of Fintech Saudi, and Mr. Rayyan Faiz, the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Bank Saudi France. Welcome all in this session, and hoping that we will enrich our audience with new information. Mr. Ziad Andrian, this pandemic is an abnormal pandemic that has disrupted the financial system in general. How did the Saudi Central Bank face those challenges to ensure the proper operating of the financial system and ensuring that all the financial transactions are not disrupted? In the beginning, thank you for allowing me to be part of this session. As has been mentioned by the excellencies in the first and second session, in regards to the economical challenges, maybe I will talk about the operational challenges. The central bank have faced this pandemic as the other sector did, rapidly, swiftly. As mentioned at the beginning, the operative aspect, the digitalization of the services of in the banking sector, and enhancing the e-commerce and limiting the visits of the clients, specifically during the lockdown period. And those challenges also have presented opportunities for the financial sectors and all the major players in the sector. The central bank also have undertaken a number of procedures with the banks that had helped to mitigate this impact, such as the procedures that had to do with waiving some of the fees for the clients of the banking system, the transfer fee transactions, the point of sale transactions, and the e-commerce that have reached 1.2 billion riyals. And we have also worked with the financial sector to activate or increase the level of activation of opening the accounts remotely. In 2020, there were more than 1 million accounts opened remotely. Those are the procedures that we have worked on in the central bank, and those procedures and other procedures had helped to mitigate the financial impact on the stores in general and SMEs, and in enhancing the banking channels for the clients. And I can assure you that we all as users, we did not notice the difference of not being able to go into a branch. We didn't notice any difference in the level of services and all the age categories that has benefited from this digital transformation. And the payment transaction, the digital payment transaction had increased during this year by more than 92% until the end of November compared to the same period of past year. Those great increments, and also the other types of payments using cell phones to make those payments have increased by more than 40% during 2020 compared to last year. This is only on the operational aspect, increasing the opportunities for the financial sector, and I believe that all the banks have benefited. Those who had invested in this digital transformation did benefit during this pandemic. This is a summary of all the results that we have reached during this past period. Of course, this pandemic have created opportunities for electronic payments, the electronic transaction, not only for the banking sector, but also for the fintech sector. We also have with us Mr. Jude, Director of the Fintech Starting. If you may, Mr. Jude, tell us about the impact, if there's any. Of course, there's a great impact in expediting the use of those technologies. If you just explain to us what exactly is Fintech Saudi. Thank you, Mr. Abdelmalik. Fintech Saudi is an initiative that was launched by SAMA in 2018 to support the technology sector. And Mr. Abdelmalik and you were participating with us in journey. So this initiative, 1 year has passed after it first started, and as a main partnership between the Capital Market Authority and the central bank to have direct and indirect initiatives to support the financial and system in general. The sector now, or the structure of the sector now, we have more than 60 fintechs in the Caribbean that are divided into business to customer, business to business, or business to customer. The challenges of today with this pandemic are based on the solutions that are provided to the clients directly and that are licensed by the legislator, the Capital Market Authority, and the central bank. They have undertaken all the legislative procedures, issuing the license and ensuring that the systems work properly. So therefore, we have more than 48 fintechs under the supervision of the regulatory bodies. Now we have this electronic payment transaction sector is a pure sector now. Lending, capital, and some of the other platforms, savings, gathering information, all those platforms now are considered some of the new established platforms that present challenges. Some of the challenges that are faced by some of the fintechs, every sector has its own challenges, but the challenges that we have agreed on the previous surveys by Fintech Saudi or other entities. First was the cyber security, measuring the demand and supply, change of the users, the payment sectors. We have seen an increase in that sector, the ability to enter into investment rounds of May during 2020, as affected by 50%. They have reported challenges in that phase. The cybersecurity was the biggest concern. The procedures needed was to ensure or to check the identity of some of the users. Maybe this was most of the dominant challenges that faced by fintech. Most of the fintechs 30, 40, 49%, they have reported that they have changed or amended some of their products as far as canceling some of the fees, deferring some of the payments, especially in the lending aspect of their work. Was there a positive impact? Was the positive impact? We at Fintech Saudi she launched the Cashless Society campaign, and then came the Corona, and we were there already. So, as the Excellencies mentioned in the previous session about the availability of or the liquidity availability within the market. So now we see in the prototypes of the fintechs as far as the lending or the capital lending, there were some of them have asked for restructuring some of the frameworks to raise the ceiling of lending. So those are some of the positive impacts that we have seen in the fintech sector. Of course, those are positive impacts, and of course there will be some obstacles in the banking sector. The impact of the pandemic as far as the performance of some companies, and specifically I will be asking about the non-operative lending aspect. The disruption on the economical aspect have affected the cash flows of many companies and maybe their abilities to stay committed to their lending payments to those in the banking sector. So how did you deal with those challenges in the banking sector? Merciful. Thank you, Abu Khalid, and we thank the Ministry of Finance, the Central Bank, and the Capital Market Authority for giving us the opportunity to participate. As you have mentioned, and I will not repeat what has been mentioned by the Excellencies in the first and second session, but there were a number of surplus packages that entered the market, whether it was from the central bank or the Ministry of Finance, that has given the banking sector in general the appropriate and the necessary support, whether it was in those sectors directly or in the SMEs or even on an individual level that were mostly impacted by this pandemic. The protection of the liquidity in the banking sector and providing support to the banks. The central bank, as mentioned by the Excellency, they were supported by midterm and long-term deposits that had helped those entities that did not stop business as usual as far as lending and ensuring that the economical cycle is operating effectively. And we thank all the officials that did take part in those incentives. It came on time, and it came specifically in the sectors and the areas of interest as we in the banking sector needed, in addition to the stimulus packages that the banking sector has dealt in cooperation with the Ministry of Finance, and the banking was it was more had a better partnership with the other government entities. Some of the clients that were not given the proper support, such as SMEs and other entities, the banks in general, with the availability of the liquidity and the the bounce back of the economy, if you may, that gave the banks an incentive to stand by their clients, provide support during the pandemic and post the pandemic, hoping that things will get better by the beginning of the next year. Were there an impact for the non-operative loans? We look at this from two aspects. The first aspect is in regards to the stimulus packages came to support those who were greatly harmed by this pandemic, and this support still exists until the first quarter of next year. And the SME sector are those who were impacted the worst by this pandemic. So the non-operative loans will still not show on the budgets of banks. But as we see on the profits of the first three quarters, there is an increase of once the period for those incentives or the stimulus packages has ended. of course, we'll say that we are still optimistic, as the minister has mentioned. The economical impact is much more better in Saudi Arabia than it is for many countries of the G20. Even when the time is up for those stimulus packages, we will still remain in a better position for those non-operative loans. But there's no doubt that we are expecting that will be an increase in those non-operative loans, and we saw that in the first quarter. Now we move from the challenges in the banking sector to the challenges for the regulatory. Of course, those challenges come under a different point of view by the central bank, and you said that there are some challenges with the expansion of fintech in the market. There must be some obstacles as far as the financial stability and as far as the technology itself, the cybersecurity, information security. If you can just review with us briefly some of the challenges that you are faced with in the central bank. Thank you. Of course, the financial technologies on a global level, I would say, uh, is bringing a new scene to the arena, and therefore its impact on the central banks on a global level is grand, and there's a excessive use of financial technology on a global level, and this was clear on the final communique and the of the ministries of finance and the central banks, that issue of financial technology. This movement that we are seeing in the kingdom now, as the other countries in the world, that's a true change that we are seeing as far as the number, the usage itself. In 2020, we have 6 million clients that use the financial technology solutions, whether on the payment sector, insurance, the collective insurance, uh, the insurance and all of its types. The financial technology, as I mentioned, has been able to attract 6 million clients, and those 6 million clients by 2020 have engaged in transactions that have reached 8 billion Saudi riyal. So this is a true transformation. This transformation must put a great responsibility on the shoulders of the central bank, that we are able to respond, and we are always keeping up with what's new in the market, and to develop the regulatory policies that keeping our systems in place, maintaining a good usage and a safe usage of those services, with the goal of enhancing and increasing the level of trust in those financial technologies that we are truly seeking to for it to thrive and prosper. And the risk, as I has mentioned, and we have seen the numbers, uh, just to put the viewer or the audience in the picture. The risks differ into too many branches. The cybersecurity is one of the greatest fears now, with the increase of the use of technology. The threats increase. Fraudulent activities does increase also with the excessive usage of those digital services. We at the central bank, we see an increase on the number of financial fraudulent activities, and there's also risks on the system in general, and also there's what we call the third party risks, as we rely heavily on the programs, on the apps, of the block sphere. So we are accelerating on daily basis, and the usage, the increase of the usage of this technology, as I mentioned, does increase the risk. So we're not isolated from the rest of the world. As we have seen in Europe, there's increased talk about the third parties, such as the cloud computing and the heavily reliance on the financial applications. In addition, that the fair level of competitiveness and the assurance of the central bank with the entry of the big techs. This is something we are greatly concerned about, and how to ensure the soundness of the financial system and applying the same standards and measures that are applied on the banking sector, whether they're major tech companies or they're fintechs. This is one of the greatest fears that we share with all the rest of the central banks in the world, and we're currently working on through the initiatives that we are engaging in now. Now, when we talked about the challenges, facing those challenges, there are some opportunities. So we'll talk to System Jude. Fintech, you are in the middle of the battle, so if you may. And so are the opportunities that you are currently seeing, are they real? Are they active? Are they continuously coming with new initiatives, new ideas? And is there any level of maturity in this industry? Since you are in the heart of this battle, and just like I said, what is the level of engagement as far as the opportunities? I will answer this question, and it brings to mind another question. Today, we have noticed that 47 fintech companies were still in the prototypes. So therefore, the policy of the CMA or SAMA is just to give the license for the prototypes and then launch the initiatives. As my colleague Ziaz said, after obtaining the proper license, there are 3 levels of the prototype environment that has been launched by the central bank and the BIS by CMA, 15 companies by CMA, and 30 companies under the supervision of the central bank. So all of those represent true opportunities for fintechs. But now we are trying to forecast them to know what's next. We approved lending, the collective financing, so all of those are true opportunities in fintech Saudi. We are in direct communication with the service providers, whether in the first ideation phase or the phases that we engage with investors directly. So that's why we have launched the growth accelerators for the first time on a national level, and also we see the investment rounds on a global level. The highest increase was in 2019 on Q3 on 150 billions on a global level, whether it's private equity and M&A. Pandemic has set us back to as we were in 2017, but 12 investment rounds in Saudi Arabia is considered phenomenal, and this is maybe just the preliminary steps, but maybe that will increase the level of investment. What do you think about the quality? I want to talk about the quality. Are those quality are those initiatives characterized by quality? The rise of the fintech was the heart of a previous financial crisis. If we look at the nature of the fintechs on local level or global level, so now we have challenges of how to keep up with the legislations and how to achieve balance between the market demands and the legislative demands, and to ensure the continuity of the demand, sustainability of demand. There are some startups that need a good level of monitoring, and maybe before we move into the market directly, we see that all the companies in the prototypes are companies that of good reputation, as mentioned by my colleague here, that assure us of the good quality of the companies available in the market. And of course, challenges are challenging for themselves. And but coming back to coronavirus again, it has disrupted some sectors or stopped them from doing business, and some other sectors have entered the business just like us in fintechs.
The question to Mr. Rayyan about the extent of supporting the banking sector for SMEs in general, which are impacted in particular by the pandemic. You have referred to some initiatives in a practical way from the heart of the banking sector. How do you deal with the most impacted SMEs? As I mentioned before, and I don't want to be repeating myself, but there are so many incentives that were in the best benefit of the SME sector. And in fact, this sector has taken a great portion of the incentives because it is a vital sector for employment, and it is most vulnerable sector. Yet, we want to see that post the pandemic, because it was impacted, the incentives came, and hopefully the incentives will be playing and achieving the goal they were created for, so that we can reach safety after the pandemic. But the role of banks and the banking sector in general, and we hope that we are playing this as an ecosystem and as a banking or government sector, is the awareness for the SMEs. How these companies to be based on strong, more solid foundations, how they can have, I'm not speaking in particular about financing or loans. I'm speaking about cash management. I'm speaking about the accounting systems. I'm speaking about compliance and all these that big companies have the financial capability to invest in. The SMEs, unfortunately, can't. So as a bank, we play our role, not at the commercial level by financing and lending money, but at the awareness and educational levels. We have created numerous workshops with SMEs, most of which in collaboration with organizations and other government. Kafala plays a major role in supporting this sector, which is dealing with banks, and we have only met all their support. However, the most important thing is to look after the pandemic and how this sector can be more solidified to be protected from any similar cases or another disruption that might happen. Thank you so much, Rayyan. If we look at the fintech use and expansion, it calls for a question. I'm going to pose the question to Mr. Ziad. The role of central bank to motivate this success and applying this fintech to incentivize innovation and development of new systems, because the fintech is evolving. So what is the role of motivating these fintechs? But please quickly for time. The central bank, we appreciate the importance of technology in this sector, which is not something new for SAMA. We've been there for tens of years. But recently, because we spoke about this, the sandbox and developing this development through the new business models, and we are going to have in January a new intake of presenting new innovations. Also, the role of the central bank is issuing instructions and updating that. We have issued a number of bylaws and instructions that aim to push forward this progress, such as the distance accounting rules of applying to digital banks, or the requirements of digital financing, and the providing the intermediary solutions. Recently, the central bank is leading a movement to developing a strategy at the national level for a fiscal strategy in collaboration with many government agencies, such as our colleagues at the CMA and the telecommunication sector as well, working together with the central banks to develop this national strategy, which will be probably in the first quarter of 2021. The strategy is going to touch on many motivational aspects, such as development of human capital, improvement of instructions, global cooperation with other regional or international countries in fintech, and other initiatives that will be born. Also, I would like to shed light on the central bank's role in collaboration with CMA is in the phase of developing a center, a physical center for a fintech Saudi in the financial center, which will be opened over the next few months. That will be a center that hosts entrepreneurs and numerous events in the financial sector and the fintech sector in the King Abdullah Financial District KFAD, which will be a beacon of light in this sector. Thank you so much, Ziad. The incentivization, we've heard the SAMA speak about that, and it requires investment and financing. And I would like to ask Ms. Nujood about the sources of investment that you have seen in the fintech sector. Can you explain a little bit the sources of investment? Are they coming from individuals? Are they coming from financial organizations? And the role of the incubator, and what is the difference between accelerator and incubator? Of course, let us start with the incubator. The incubator, it takes the idea to be able to enter the market. The accelerator takes the opportunities where there's a minimum viable product or proof of concept to be applied in the market directly. So FinTech Saudi launched an accelerator for the fintech companies that are capable, which are already working in the directly or indirectly in the market. Regarding the sources of investment in the fintech companies here, particularly in Saudi Arabia, starting with all the fintechs were VCs or venture capitals or family investments. But the acceleration in the fintech sector in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is very immense. In 2018, for example, we had 10 companies, and in 2020, we have over 60 companies. And that indicates the entrance of private equities and banks that have investment arms and funds, particularly in fintechs, and the VC or venture capital with other funds which we have seen, such as which is matching with the individual investors, or as we say, the angelic investors. So now there is maturity even in the investment manner and the investment cycles. And one of the goals to launch the accelerator is that we want to see the rounds. We don't want to see just the early stages. We want to see the rounds, which are after A or B in Saudi Arabia, as a quality move. And we've seen that in the payment sector, which is a mature sector, and service providers, which is already entering big investment parts. Did you notice any, did you notice the existence of foreign investors from outside Saudi Arabia investing in this sector? In some investment funds that we have today, they go in co-matching funds together with also, which we have seen in Saudi. They are present. And even the accelerator, we have accepted two foreign companies from outside Saudi Arabia to incentivize foreign direct investment in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Very clear. Thank you, Nujood. Nujood has mentioned that even banks are investing in fintech. And I'm going to ask Mr. Rayyan, the perspective of banks for the development taking place in fintech or financial technology. How do the banks look at this? Do they look at as a challenge or competition? In fact, it is a challenge and opportunity at the same time. So it depends on the bank, how they face this challenge or how they look at this trend. It can be a challenge and core business of the banks, but at the same time, some banks find it an opportunity. So as Mr. Ziad has explained and Ms. Najud, many opportunities we see today in fintech or in fintech companies in the sandbox, they are doing the work of the banks, either in terms of lending or payments or individual loans or for SMEs. We, from our perspective, we find that as an opportunity. We have invested in one of the fintech companies when we were among the first investors, and we found an acceleration in the value or if the investment value that we put there. Now, at the end, we're not at the end, but lending some fintech companies that support. So instead of using the capital to loan, they can use loans from the bank so that we are partners, and then we can see how the business model is going, and then we will be partners. Banks have made big investments in the infrastructure over the few years. These investments can be profitable for banks to provide this infrastructure as services for companies of fintech. So as they call, this is a global service, and the confidence in banks in terms of either central bank or the clients and the infrastructure or the investment in the infrastructure, they, as I say, this is an added value that we can provide as a service for fintech companies, and we are in process of studying some suggestions put to us to be the service provider or their service provider. So we don't compete with them, but we share the profits together. This trend is present and no one is supporting that. So we have to be partners instead of competing against each other. I'm going to move on to Mr. Ziad about the technologies. There's great investment in blockchain or digital currency. We heard recently about the central bank's experience in Abir, which is a digital currency, and we only hear about experiments. I think these experiments are going to turn into a reality, which is directly in place. Mr. Ziad, thank you so much for this question. I will try to answer as much briefly as possible. In short, digital coins, or as a concept, as appeared a few years ago in the private sector, which is a kind of using the coding systems in order to create an asset that might not be of any value or have a value connected to one or other things. But the use of coding technology is in the heart of it. This action, which was not away from banks that were closely monitoring this adoption of digital coins or digital currencies in the private sector. But now we're speaking in the Financial Stability Forum. The central banks have a major responsibility in financial stability. Therefore, many central banks, pioneering central banks in the world at the G20 levels, have started scientific experimentation, either done by the central bank in Saudi Arabia in collaboration with the UAE central bank, or recently in the last week with the central bank in Switzerland, with here with the stock market in Switzerland. All these aim to first explore the dimensions or horizons and its technical impacts on central banks and a realistic application. Ziad, we're speaking about post the experiment. Have we reached about, because we heard about many experiments for many years, after these experiments, what's happening? Central banks now, some of them have reached the level of a live BOC in digital currencies, and others are still in discussion phases of the concept. I believe that what this is a high experiment that regard the security of information. The next steps are going to be either here in the kingdom or in other countries. We are participating with the other central banks of studying the greater impacts about the financial policies, which has been explained. You can imagine a digital currency that can be exchanged between two sites without a central system. Its impact on the tools of the system, or the central bank, or the rates of interest, or the exchange rates. All these dimensions for central banks are being studied by central banks, and the world still has not reached an agreement on what is a digital currency that will be adopted by a central bank. We hope in the kingdom to be initiators or to participate with the global community in developing this future. All these developed technologies should facilitate all services, especially in financial inclusion. My question to Ms. Najoud about financial inclusion in fintech, and is there a directive by Fintech Saudi Arabia for companies for the departments or the agencies or the sectors that require a focus in order to achieve the financial inclusion included by the Vision 20, by the G20. Loaning, savings, and opportunities of investment are key axes of the Vision 2030 in terms of the financial inclusion. These are the major headlines. There are other subsidiaries such as the cashless society and the percentage of banking services coverage for individuals. These are also the main headlines. So this is an integrated process. So when we see the kinds of working fintech companies, either directly, they all lead towards the same result, which is filling the gap between financial inclusion and the reality. And we can see that the opportunities of investment in savings are among our top priorities. From here, I move to Mr. Rayyan. From your experience with the international financial industry, do you think that what's happening in this sector in Saudi Arabia good? Is it in line with the global trend? Mr. Rayyan? What we see, Mr. Abu Khalid, that it is a very promising sector, and the ideas that come from Saudi entrepreneurs are really pioneering. And most of the successful companies which we see now are companies where a pioneer is, there's a Saudi pioneering entrepreneur who is filling a gap in the financial banks services, either in terms of convenience or speed of providing the service. They know the client, they know what the clients need. They came up with the idea that suits the market and the client. So from this perspective, I am very hopeful, optimistic, and the early signs which we can see now are very good, very promising, and so much is coming up, and we hope that there's going to be no shortage, neither of ideas nor of financial resources. And we see venture capital is coming or moving towards fintech and supporting this sector greatly. So all the tools in the ecosystem are present, available, and the future is probably very progressive. Thank you, Rayyan. We have reached the end of our third session, which is the last in this Financial Stability Forum. I would like to thank Mr. Rayyan, the head of the Saudi Fransi Bank, Ms. Najoud Al-Malik, the director of Fintech Saudi, and Mr. Ziyad Al-Yusuf, the deputy governor of Sama for development. Thank you for your contribution, and we hope that everybody has benefited from your input, and we would like to see you one more time in the future. Thank you so much. Thank you.